All right, so this is the phylum Echinodermata, letter H in your outline. These animals, Echinodermata, they all have spiny skin. So the word echino means spiny, and then dermata is referring to skin. So just think about like when you have a skin problem, you go to a dermatologist, right? So derma is that skin word. So let's take a look at an image of these organisms, and you're going to see a lot of sea stars, you're going to see sea urchins. If you look at these pictures, they all have a hard, spiny skin. So your poster child for Echinodermata can be a sea star. What kind of symmetry do you think this sea star has? So it is radial symmetry. There's not a distinct right and left. It's kind of the same as you go all the way around, but it does have a top and bottom that's different. However, look at the larva. Would you say this has radial or bilateral symmetry? And the answer is bilateral. So this is interesting in that the larvae usually have a bilateral symmetry, and then the adults will have the radial symmetry. Sea stars are going to be so the adults is what you want to think about in terms of the poster child for this phylum. So their bodies lack segments. They typically show radial symmetry as adults. They do have an endoskeleton beneath their skin, and they have something called a water vascular system. So they can actually suck in the water into their bodies, and it fills these canals. The water is circulated around their bodies for both gas exchange and for nutrient and waste disposal. And they have these incredible tube feet. So they use the water pressure inside their bodies to push these little tiny feet, and they walk around using this water pressure. This video here is that a video on the water vascular system, so I'll post this in the module for you guys to watch. All right, so that's the Echinodermata. The next phylum is Chordata, and these are going to be the animals that have 4 features that are listed here. So everything in the box is what all chordates have in common. All right, so let's go through these. All chordates have a dorsal hollow nerve cord right here. A dorsal, which means it's on the back of their body, it's hollow, and it's a nerve cord. So for us, what that means is it's our spinal cord, right? So we have a brain, and these organisms, it's a collection of neurons. It may not be a brain that resembles our brain, right, or a big brain like we have, but it is a collection of neurons. And then we have an extension away from that, which is going to be our hollow dorsal nerve cord, like our spinal cord. So if you have an invertebrate, that means that you do not have bones, those the vertebrae that we have, right, that cover the spinal cord. If it's a vertebrate, then you do have the bones covering this nerve cord, okay? So hollow, our spinal cord, just so you guys know, it does have a tiny hole that runs through the entire spinal cord, and you'll learn that if you need to go through anatomy, but technically our spinal cord is hollow, tiny little hole that goes through it. All right, the second thing is a notochord. So this guy here. A notochord is a flexible rod between the digestive system and the nerve cord. So for us, for vertebrates, this would be the bone. So the bone is going to separate the spinal cord from our digestive tract. So this is our whatever this is going to be. But for other animals, it's going to be a structure. It's just a division, right? So there's notochord is a division that separates spinal cord or that nerve cord from the guts. So that's number 2. Number 3, pharyngeal slits. All animals will have pharyngeal slits, and sometimes this appears for a very short amount of time in development. So for us, for humans, we don't have pharyngeal slits as adults. We have pharyngeal slits being produced as an embryo, but then they change, right? So we do have them for a short period of time, and then it disappears. So that's pharyngeal slits. Not all animals will have them as adults, but they do appear in embryology in that embryological stage of development. And then a post-anal tail. So again, not all vertebrates have a post-anal tail, but it does appear in our developmental process. So as an embryo, humans, right, we have a post-anal tail. And then as we continue on the development, as we become a fetus, we lose that post-anal tail. Okay, so some organisms keep it and some organisms lose it. But those are the four biological definitions, like those are the four structures that you need to have in order to become an animal in this phylum, right? Put you in this phylum Chordata. Now, let's look at the vertebrates, right? So invertebrates do not have a backbone. Vertebrates do. So I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page with what a vertebra or vertebrae, that's plural, right? They're these bones that create our vertebral column. Our spinal cord actually runs through an opening in these bones. The bones protects it. You know, so a snake that has this, right? A snake would fall under the group of a vertebrate, right? So if you look at the way that this phylum is broken into these larger groups, 3 groups are invertebrates, and then everything else is vertebrates. So the 3 invertebrate chordates are lancelets, tunicates, and hagfishes. So I have that written down, letter A. Invertebrate chordates are lancelets, tunicates, and hagfishes. Here's their picture. Lancelets, tunicates, and hagfishes. Probably things they've never seen before. Maybe you've seen a hagfish at an aquarium. Lancelets are pretty small. They're about the size of your fingernail or something. But they're just in this group because they have those 4 distinct characteristics. Tunicates as well. Don't look like much of an animal, but they are. And then we have our hagfish. When we look at our vertebrates, okay, now when things will start looking familiar. So here's our ancestral chordate, right? So it has all 4 of those structures we talked about. Tunicates and lancelets and hagfishes. These are invertebrate chordates. Then you would, over here, right, you would put the development of the vertebra here, right? Because everything from that point on, if you go down this, lampreys, cartilaginous fish, bony fish, these are all going to be considered vertebrates. And then what else? What developed here? Tetrapod limbs. That means 4 limbs. So our earlier vertebrates that evolved earlier are basically fish. And then we have right here, right, would be the tetrapod evolution. So 4 limbs. Amphibians and reptiles and mammals have 4 limbs. And then we have another called an amniote. Reptiles and birds belong in the same group. That's why they're together here. So right here, there would be amniotes, or an amniotic sac developing, and I'll explain what that is, but reptiles and mammals will have amniotes, or amniotes. Okay, so here again are hagfish, right? So this is an invertebrate chordate. Lampreys are actually vertebrate chordates. And then we have cartilaginous fish and bony fish, which are also vertebrates. All right, so let's take a look at the vertebrates. Letter B in your outline. They have endoskeletons composed of a cranium, the skull, and the backbone made of bones called vertebrae. And then we're going to look at these classes of vertebrates. So number 1 is fish. So we'll just stay on this picture, right, because we have 2 groups of category, 2 kinds of fish. We can have cartilaginous fish, which means that their endoskeleton, right, the skeleton that they have is actually not bone, it's made of cartilage. And it makes them a little bit more flexible. And sharks fall under this category. Shark has cartilage as their bony structure. And then bony fishes, right, this is probably the fish that we are used to eating, because when you cook a whole fish, you have to pick out the bones. So bony fishes have bones. They have a swim bladder. So inside of these fish, they have a special organ called a swim bladder. The swim bladder, it fills with gas. So when they're in the water, they can float, and they can rest in the water. So they're not going to sort of sink or come up to the surface of the water. Their swim bladder can help them float in the middle of the water. All right, then we have amphibians. So amphibians are an interesting group of animals because they mix They are an intermediate animal between aquatic life and terrestrial life. So they live half of their life, they need water, because if you think about a frog as your poster child for an amphibian, the tadpole, which is their earlier life form, has to be in water, right? Their eggs are hatched in water, they become a tadpole, and then they become a frog. They lose their tail and they metamorphosize into a frog. And so the frog can be terrestrial, but this tadpole is tied to water. So these are thought, the amphibians are thought to be sort of the link between water life and terrestrial life. All right, so on your notes, I have they exhibit a mix of aquatic and terrestrial adaptations. They usually need water to reproduce and typically undergo a metamorphosis from an aquatic larva to a terrestrial adult. And they think that, they are the first vertebrates to colonize land. So these guys show that they're, halfway in water, halfway in land. So they think that these are the first ones that came onto land. All right, so some examples of our amphibians. And this is a really interesting, this walking fish. And I'll put this also in the module for you guys to watch. But there are fish right now. They're called mud guppy. I think they're mud guppies, but they can survive on land. They can walk on land. So they use their fins to move around. And over time, right, the bony fish, the bones in their fins can actually become more robust and larger and eventually become limbs to help them walk on land. But this is a really interesting and fun video. I'll share that on the module. All right, so reptiles and birds are in the same evolutionary branch. Reptiles, including birds, and mammals are amniotes, right? So remember I said I would tell you what that is. And they produce amniotic eggs. So amniotes are animals that produce an amniotic egg. What that is a fluid-filled region in their body, right, that gets hard and forms an egg. So amniotic eggs is a way for an organism to have offspring, but on completely divorced of water. So so you're actually creating a very watery environment for the development of the baby inside, right, with the shell on the outside to protect them from the dry land. So it's a waterproof shell. Inside, they have a watery environment for the embryo. So the amniotic egg is a fluid-filled egg for that embryo development. So now we can have reptiles live completely on land. So it's different than amphibian, right? Because amphibians have to go to the water to have their offspring. But snakes don't have to. Snakes can live in the desert, or turtles can live in the desert because they can have this amniotic egg evolved, and it protects their embryo and fetus, giving them a moist environment to live. All right, so these are all the different kinds of reptiles we have. Notice birds are in this group. Birds lay eggs. And so non-bird reptiles, right, they have an amniotic egg. And also the second thing that they have that helps them be completely away from water is a scaly skin. So the scaly skin is to waterproof them so they can prevent dehydrating and they can last on land longer. They also tend to be ectotherms, which means that their body temperature is the same as the temperature outside, right? So they have to they're very slow moving if it's cold outside. When it's warmer, their bodies are warmer and their metabolism speeds up, so they're more active when it's warmer. All right. Birds, however, right? Birds are a little different, but they're still under the same category. They're endotherms. They tend to have, what that means is they can control their body temperature and maintains a steady body temperature. They have lots of adaptations for flight, right? So they have honeycombed bones. They have one ovary instead of two to make them lighter. They have feathers, of course, for flight. And their wings are shaped like an airfoil. And what that means is that it's curved on one side and sort of concave curved on the other side. So when it goes through the air naturally makes a lower pressure on the top and a higher pressure on the bottom. What that means is the air pushes up on the wing. So you'll see like, birds hanging out in the sky, and it doesn't look like they're flying at all. They don't need to flap their wings. They're just kind of riding the air currents, and it's because the shape of them as the air goes over it, right, naturally pushes up on their wings. And that's how our airplanes are made as well, if you think of an airplane wing. The beak that they have and not having teeth also helps to lighten their body. So there's 4 adaptations that birds have to lighten their bodies for flight, and they're listed there. And then this is the organism called a theropod that they think that birds evolved from. All right, so let's take a look at our next category here, which is mammals. So mammals is a very, sort of what we think of, probably if you said name an animal. So major groups of mammals here, there are monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. What makes a mammal a mammal? Let's just start there, right? So letter B, mammals have 2 unique characteristics. They have hair and then mammary glands, right? That's why mammals are called mammals, because of mammary glands. And these are milk-producing glands that nourish their baby. Okay, so 3 major groups. Monotremes are egg-laying mammals. The example here is the duck-billed platypus. Then we have marsupials, which are mammals, but they have a pouch, and they give birth to sort of a very tiny fetus stage that crawls into their pouch, and the remaining time of their development is in the pouch and not inside of a uterus. And then we have eutherians, which are fully developed at birth. So this is like, we would fall into this category. They're also called placental mammals. The baby develops entirely inside the inside the uterus, and then is born sort of fully developed. I'm also going to put these 2 links in the mod for you guys to watch. This kangaroo birth, if you've never seen that, it's very interesting. A lot of people get a kick out of that. And this is just duck-billed platypus, just to see some people who study them, what they're looking at. All right, so moving into sort of primates and human ancestry. Humans, we are primates, right? This mammalian group also includes lorises, patos, lemurs, tarsiers, monkeys, and apes. So primates are distinguished because we have characteristics that make it possible to live in trees. So we've developed things like very limber shoulder joints, right? Your shoulder, if you think about all the joints on your body, your shoulder is the most limber. You can move your arm around in like wide, really wide, big movements. And this is because to live in trees, we have to have very limber shoulder joints to hold on to branches and to sling from one area to another. Eyes in the front of our face give us really good 3-dimensional vision. Hand-eye coordination is very good, again, for tree living. And extensive parental care is also meets the demands of tree living, right? And also for survival. So here is a picture of all the different kinds of primates, humans belonging into this group of primates. So we contain all those characteristics that refer back to our ancestors as being tree-dwelling animals. Okay, so this is a nice, again, chart of the primates. So we have an ancestral primate that lived in trees, right? And these are all of the primates that are on the planet now: lemurs, lorises, and patos, tarsiers, New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, and then we have, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. So notice that chimpanzees and humans, I think we've talked about this before, how we are the closest in relationship. So we are sometimes considered a 3rd chimpanzee. So the chimps and humans are very closely related, closer than chimps and gorillas, closer than humans and gorillas. So this is just addressing some misconceptions that people have, and sometimes this kind of feeds into why people are sort of not willing to think that we evolved, or that, because they think that maybe we evolved directly from a monkey or some kind of monkey-like thing, and then that was our ancestor, but it's not true. Chimps and humans represent two divergent branches of the anthropoid tree, and they evolved from a less specialized ancestor. So our ancestors did not look like chimps or any other modern ape. And human evolution is not a ladder. So a lot of times students, or it's portrayed that humans are at the top of the sort of evolutionary ladder, and it's not a ladder. It's more like a big branchy tree. There's not like one best organism, right? So just keep that in mind, that human evolution is not a ladder, and instead evolution is more like a multi-branched bush than a ladder. And every organism has adaptations to make it survive in its own specialized habitat. We do have lots of unique characteristics as humans. We do have, if you look at your outline, we have a bipedal, which means that we have two legs, we stand upright, and we have much, much larger brains. Our brains are very unique and large compared to a chimp, for example. So if you look at the human ancestry, Homo neanderthalensis, so we are Homo sapiens, right? So here we are at Homo sapiens. We still exist today at time zero, right? Our closest relative, Homo neanderthalensis, died out. And they think that there is competition between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis, but also there is interbreeding. And they're finding now that there are people, if you look at your DNA, there are some people that contain lots of Neanderthal genetics. So they think that there was interbreeding between the two. Yeah, so but this, what I want you to get from this picture is just the fact that this is our lineage, right? So our human evolution, all our precursor Homo, Homo is our genus. So the other organisms in that genus went extinct, but we came from a line of organisms that you don't see any chimps here, right? You don't see any monkey sort of organisms here. So we didn't come from monkeys. We came from these other ancestral kinds of organisms that don't exist anymore. They went extinct. I also want you to know that there's the out of Africa theory that we evolved, Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. And so that was our point of evolution. And then the humans colonized the planet, obviously, so, but it's out of Africa. So Homo sapiens first evolved in Africa. All right, so human evolution, some concept checks for you. So between 5 and 7 million years ago, humans and apes diverged from. So take a look. Okay, and your answer is letter A, an ape-like ancestor. This prosimians I didn't mention in this lecture, and I don't expect you to know it, but that's this group of organisms right here. Tarsiers, lemurs, and walruses and podozoaries are considered prosimians. But if you look at the question, between 5 and 7 million years ago, so that's around here, right? Because that's 10 million years ago. So somewhere around here, humans and apes diverged from, right? So here are all the apes, right? And then we're talking about here. So we're not talking about old world monkeys. So we didn't come from anything that looked like an old world monkey. It's not a new world monkey. We didn't come from anything that looked like this, right? We didn't come from an ancestor that looked like a prosimian. So some other ape-like ancestor existed here that no longer exists on the planet, right? But that's where we evolved from. And then the last one, first land vertebrates were amphibians. However, the amphibians are still dependent on water environments to complete their life cycle. The adaptation that allows land vertebrates to complete their life cycle on land is, so think about that, and it's going to be B, the amniotic egg, right? Because amphibians, the reason why they're still dependent on water was to reproduce, was their sort of egg laying and their immature larval form, I guess we can call it tadpole larva, but then their adult form is on land. So the amniotic egg, or the self-contained pond, right, is a structure that allows animals to move away from the water so they can reproduce on land incompletely. Okay, Okay, so that's it. So just make sure that when you look at your human ancestry portion, that you realize that um, you read the little blurb I have, read the textbook, and then just that humans are different because we're bipedal and we have much larger brains. Okay, that concludes this chapter.